But I know that I was sort of still in the idea that architects was this glamorous kind of profession, and school definitely fortified that.
There's no shortage of disgruntled architects. There is so much possibility for people who have studied architecture.
Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. Today's going to be a shorter podcast episode. We're going to dive into an article that we stumbled across on Reddit, where we like to lurk and browse at times. My name is Enoch Sears, and I'm joined today here by Mr. Rion Willard. Rion, hello.
Thank you very much, Enoch. Pleasure to be here, as always.
Now, those of you who are not familiar with Business of Architecture is a consultancy for architectural practices. It consists of experts in business, particularly as it regards to architectural practices, and we help firm owners implement what is known as the smart practice method. And you can find more out about that by going to smartpracticemethod.com. Do not go there if you enjoy overwhelm, if you enjoy stress, long hours, and low pay, because that's the antidote to that.
And now a word from today's sponsor. A while ago, I began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. I was intrigued by another business that's addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor costs. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration. And World Teams helps you reduce your operating costs without compromising the quality that is so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessafarchitecture.com/world teams. That's one word, businessafarchitecture.com/world teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationship. Go to businessafarchitecture.com/world teams.
We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale.
So the article that we found here on Reddit, and I love Reddit because there's just, people are just, it seems like they're very authentic on Reddit. And I like the upvoting and downvoting. It seems to keep trolls out more than some other social platforms. So the question here that someone had posted in the architecture subreddit was, why are so many architects so cynical about their job? And the person I'm going to read a little bit out of this particular post here, this question that was asked in Reddit. I'm currently studying architecture and I love it. I get the dry parts of architecture, all the rather boring red tape, codes, specifications, monotonous detailing, shitty work hours, long education, and low pay. But why so cynical? And then there was a lot of comments down here. And interestingly, it seems like some of the top answers said something along the lines of, one of the things I think is unique is that the general public has a perception of the job of architect as an elite, artistic yet technical, high-paying and glamorous kind of career, and attaches a certain amount of prestige to it, which I would say that sounds accurate.
Yep.
Very true. And he says, this person says, think of how architects are portrayed in films or books, for example. Certainly, the architect is definitely, we're still enshrined and glorified in the entertainment media, I would say, for the most part. There's some cynical stuff there too that is kind of funny.
That's funny you say that. I miss the reaction I used to get when I introduced myself as an architect. I mean, I still am an architect, but I'll often introduce myself as a business consultant these days. And there's way more suspicion when you tell people what you do, or you tell people sometimes you tell people about the podcast, and that's quite interesting. But when I used to introduce myself as an architect, people would be like, "Oh, wow, so interesting, amazing." Da, 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 da. They always a kind
That's a
of
good point.
excitement around it, and there's a prestige that's associated with it for sure.
It's true. When I tell people I run an education and training company, no one ever says, "Oh, wow, that's amazing." That's a good point. I do remember, if you say you're an architect, people are and I mean, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, "Oh, I wanted to be an architect myself," or, "Oh, I took some drafting in college," and
Yeah,
sounds
there's
amazing.
there's a romance to it for sure.
It's a glamour. There's a glamour. Okay, so it could be that. That's why, maybe one reason why we get so cynical is a lot of times we go into it with different expectations of what we thought architecture would actually be like. I know I can say that was the case for me. I mean, for me, it was interesting when I went to Cornell University. I felt like I was the least indoctrinated of my fellow colleagues and students, right? Like, the reason why I decided to become an architect was because I'd always loved art. I loved drawing, and I had a talent for it. And I wanted to do something where I could actually monetize my talent. I wanted to actually make a decent income. I didn't want to be a starving artist, so to speak. So I thought, well, architecture seems to blend both of those. It's a profession, so you're going to get a decent pay. And I won't have to live with my parents until I'm 40. And at the same time, I can do architecture, which is, it's very artistic, and it's being able to be creative. And so that's why I ended up in school. But what was interesting, when I got to school, I found out that I would say there was maybe 10 to 20, probably around 20%, I would say, of my fellow students there. Like, they were already kind of dyed-in-the-wool architects. They brought the architecture ethos. They knew of some of the unheard of architects that I didn't. I mean, when I went to school, I knew of 2 architects, or maybe 3. Mike Brady from the Brady Bunch. I am Pei, just because I stumbled across one of his monographs in a local bookstore, and of course, Frank Lloyd Wright. I'd never heard of Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Alvar Aalto. Some of these other very influential within the architectural niche architects. But when I went to school, it was interesting to find out that some of my fellow students there, they were talking about all these architects that they knew that were kind of more obscure in everyday parlance. And that was surprising to me. But I know that I was sort of still in the idea that architects was this glamorous kind of profession. And school definitely fortified that. So that may go into this question as well, which is, in school, let's face it, universities are marketing institutions. They're there to market their services and what they provide, which is a degree.
Yeah, we often don't talk about the fact that, and academics don't like to talk about the fact that they're working for institutions that are ultimately businesses, and that there is a kind of a business agenda. Not so this is bad, it's just that it's not, there's a consequence to not acknowledging it and denying about it. And I would certainly, again, talk from my own personal experience, probably echoes a bit of yours. I loved my architectural education in general, and enjoyed finding out about all those kind of random architects that nobody had ever heard of. And I enjoyed the kind of encouragement to go off into a really random, weird niche of thinking about something, or something very esoteric and all that kind of stuff. But I had a very kind of short, sharp kick to the teeth upon entry into the professional world of architecture, because what I had led to believe it was about through university was so far away from what it actually was about.
Yeah, I mean, you went to the Bartlett School, right?
Yeah.
And they taught you that architecture was about reflected ceiling plans and waterproofing details.
Absolutely.
And when you got out, you discovered that it was actually about envisioning beautiful landscapes, watercolor
Yeah, and I'm really
hand
questioning
renderings.
what it means to be an architect and to
Exactly.
be like a
Exactly.
kind of an avant-garde philosopher of some
Well, you have a
description.
great story about one of your first jobs with the whole airport story. Tell us that.
Oh, my first job was working at Grimshaw Architects in London, and
You should have known with a name like Grimshaw. I mean, you should have been forewarned. I mean, no offense to all my
they were quite
wonderful people at Grimshaw.
They were quite despite the name, it was quite a well-known practice who'd done lots of lovely high-tech work in the UK, like the Eden Project and stuff. So they had a bit of prestige about them. And I graduated in 2008. So
I know, a
obviously-
bad joke. We're probably going to get some hate mail from Grimshaw Partners now. I know you guys do excellent work. We're just joking. Lighten up.
No, I
Trying
mean,
to bring
like,
some
look,
humor in here.
it's not the first time I've had that comment. Even to myself,
Okay.
just saying the word Grimshaw, you're like, it sounds.
It's a stale joke.
It
okay,
literally
stale
sounds
joke.
grim.
Yeah, well,
sounds-
it's like when people, when they hear my name, Enoch Sears, I get all the jokes about Kmart or Sears or department stores. I get it. It's tired and worn. Okay, so you ended up at Grimshaw Partners, which is a very prestigious firm.
Prestigious firm.
So-
They do lots of amazing work, and they're very good at what they do, and they're kind of probably some of the best architects for transport architecture in the world. And I have a lot more appreciation for them as a business now. But my experience there was, I ended up working. It was kind of the beginning of the recession, and the work was very, very dry. It's the best way to put it.
What were you doing specifically? Help us understand.
One of my jobs was I worked on the refurbishment of the South Terminal at Gatwick, so Gatwick Airport, and the Gatwick Airport is a very ugly looking terminal building, and my job was I wasn't in charge of anything. I was just drawing. I was part of a team drawing the reflected ceiling.
You were in charge
plan.
of putting some lines on the paper, Ryan. Let's be realistic here.
I just had to move the lines around when instructed, and perhaps change
There you go,
title
there you
blocks.
go.
And I remember
What else did you expect?
and it was like 6 months of just drawing a grid. And then you'd spend time, and you'd have to go and look at, specifications of ceiling panels and aluminium polyester powder coated ball nosed ringed ceiling panels, and they were just sheets of metal. And that was my job for 8 hours a day for months and months and months. I remember complaining about it to my dad, and he was like, "Oh, you don't know anything about boring jobs. I once had a job counting the perforations on stamps."
They do that? You get paid for that?
He had some random
Sounds
job.
like some sort of tortured Buddhist meditation or something.
He had some job where he was working for like an auction house, and they were looking at rare stamps. And so his job, he was only young, but he had to count the numbers on and make sure that they had like an even amount of numbers. Otherwise, anyway.
And so he went into accounting. I mean, come on. There should have been.
So obviously it was the forerunner for that. But I was like, actually, no, that sounds in alignment actually with levels of boredom of what I've been doing. And then everyone has there's obviously the attitude of oh well, you got to suck it up. You got to cut your teeth. And I think the frustration there as well, certainly from my entitled perspective, was I've just spent 8 years at university learning all this stuff, and now none of it is appropriate or applicable or has anything to do with anything. And I could have learned to do these skills that I'm learning in the actual kind of craft of architecture. A, I don't know them, and B, I could have learned this 10 years ago, and now we could be doing something interesting. So there was that kind of frustration of, you've got to be joking me. And then you kind of the reality sets in of the long hours and the level of pay that you get, and then you can kind of see your other friends who didn't work as hard at university, and they only spent a few hours, and now they've got jobs in the city working in finance, getting paid 120 grand, and you're like, What?
Yeah, they're paying for your dinner and when you guys go out and you're grateful for it.
Oh,
Thanks for picking up the tab. Oh, ouch.
yeah. That's I used
Yeah,
to call it
there's
the architect blues, isn't it?
yeah, it's part of it, right? Anyone stuck in something that long is they're gonna feel taxed, especially if you went into it thinking that and expecting that it's gonna be a very creative endeavor. You
Yeah,
get into a lot of artistic
I,
problem
I,
solving.
I do. When I look back on my own education, again, I really enjoyed my time at the Bartlett, but I look back on it now perhaps with a sense of it being kind of intellectually very indulgent. That said, there's lots of ideas that I kind of incubated there that I now get to express and practice in a very, very different way here with what we do at Business of Architecture. So I'm very grateful that for everything, all the experiences have led up to this experience that I have now. So it's all
You landed. It worked out. It worked out in the
it
end.
all worked out. So
And it's not even the end yet.
exactly. We've just begun. So
Here's one of the comments from this Reddit thread here. It says, the fact that we have responsibility for so many aspects of a building while having lower pay than our other disciplines. I do remember this. I remember, when I was working on a large hospital project, I remember going to the meetings on the job site and meeting my peers who were in other disciplines. So for instance, I guess they call them project engineers. That's what they call in the construction side. That's what they a lot of times call the people who are at my same kind of level on the job site. It's kind of, they're not superintendents, but they're kind of just underneath the superintendent. They call them project engineers. And I remember going home and I was like, I wonder what he makes. So I do a little quick search about what project engineers, and it's like 30% more than what I'm making, and less schooling and a lot less experience. I'm like, damn it. So
yeah,
this comment here continues. We're constantly expected to produce more, better, faster for free because architecture is at times a race to the bottom if you're not careful. I'm pretty happy in general, but I get the cynicism it can wear on you. I think that's, whoever made that comment there, sounds like a pretty good summary of the way that we feel in architecture a lot.
yeah. There's no shortage of disgruntled architects. Certainly, even if you're working in your own practice and it's a struggle with your fees. I think the economic side of it really does, if you're not doing anything to empower yourself around that part of it, or you feel like it's hopeless and there's nothing I can do about it, that's very exhausting.
Crushing.
That's very, very exhausting. And
Yeah.
we can be our own worst enemy with this in the architecture industry because we can just, be in complaint about it as opposed to try and change something. And even for, individual architects, I like the stories of people leaving the architecture profession. There's an argument to be said that there's an oversaturation of architects, and there's thousands and thousands of students as a degree, as an education. There's loads of people. Again, we go back to our earlier point of the education side of it is a successful business, and they've marketed it well, and it looks really appealing, and it's this kind of creative.
And they know how to market, but they're just not teaching us how to do it.
It's the creative, free, expressed, profession that has high status.
Rion, you would be amazed. So my son recently crushed his SAT exams, which is one of the examinations to get, to get into. He obviously got his brains from his mother, not his father. That you use to get into there's two basic exams that are taken here in the U.S. One's the SAT, the one's the ACT. Generally, it's the SAT. And, all the top Ivy League schools, you're all going to have a minimum SAT score to get into those kind of schools. You're looking at, a lot of people have at least a 1,200, 1,300 or above, right? And so he's placed very, very highly on the SAT, like top 1 percentile. So he's getting Ivy League schools writing him. But going back to this marketing as a businessman or someone who gets the idea of marketing business, I'm just amazed at how these universities are marketing to my son. Like not a day goes by that doesn't get some postcard from some school touting how it's like the perfect place, and here's what we represent, and here's our ethos, and some are better than others. But it's very interesting to see that a lot of schools are pulling out all the stops. They have a marketing budget, obviously. They're reaching out. They know their avatar. They want students that have scored a certain percentage on their SATs, which is why he's on this list that the College Board sells. It's all a business. It all goes back in one way, shape, or form. Money's involved because money is what is the equilibrium of exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the universities in the architectural world. Each university has its own kind of brand. If I look at the Bartlett where I trained, for example, that had its own brand, and it had its own brand of the kind of students that it wanted to celebrate, and the work that it kind of publicizes, and it's exciting and sexy looking, out of this world, avant-garde thinking. And then it kind of gets all the research credits from the university or however, and wins the award and becomes this place that's marketed as being an intellectual hothouse for.
It sounds like a good fodder for a meme, like one of these internet memes where it's like, here's what an architect from the Bartlett looks like. Here's an architect from, USC. Here's an architect from Berkeley. Here's an architect from Harvard. Here's an architect from Notre Dame. The ones from Notre Dame, we know they would definitely have the cardigan and the bow tie. All you Notre Dame fans, like they're the one of the schools that still teaches classicism in the U.S. Like if you want to learn classicism, classical architecture, you go to Notre Dame. Like you go there. They have hands down, that's the school. I think Yale maybe has a little bit of that, although they've gone a lot more avant-garde modern. We all know people at what would people at Harvard be dressed like based upon the ethos there, the GSD?
I'd imagine that they were all in their kind of in their shirts with the buttons up to the top collar, wearing
that would definitely be the Harvard look. You'd expect to see that.
The cardigan,
maybe like a Letterman's jacket or something.
Exactly.
Not at the architect school though. Like what would be the school where people would be like literally have like neck tattoos and they're like maybe even wearing some eyeliner or something, they're like kind of like very those would be, who would that be?
In London, that would probably be like Westminster or something. Some of the more edgy London.
Cooper Union in New York City.
They're kind of more
SciArc in Southern California.
The kind of more edgy avant-garde schools.
There you go.
Pushing the boundaries.
I'm liking this. If anyone wants to set in any memes around this, if you want to create a meme, we will share it and post it on our networks. I think that could be a pretty funny thing, is to like kind of categorize the schools. Auburn University. Auburn's the home of Rural Studio.
See, I would
Mockbeat, where they would go out and build stuff in rural areas.
I'd imagine them all in like gum boots and like.
What are gun boots? Oh, you mean gum boots? You mean the rubber boots?
Yeah.
No, no, that makes sense. They probably are. They'd have some khaki pants that kind of sagging a little bit.
Exactly. Your cargo pants with loads of pockets to put tools in and stuff.
A flannel shirt.
There you go.
Although down south that would be quite brutal.
Too hot.
Yep, too hot. Let's see. ITT Chicago.
I wouldn't know. I'm thinking black turtlenecks.
Black turtlenecks. So that's a go-to. Well, and see this goes back to our conversation of expectations of architecture versus what architecture is really like. I think one of the challenges that maybe leads to the cynicism is how difficult it is to actually understand, number one, what an architect does, from the outside. Number two, what schools represent and how schools are different, the different ethos that schools have, the philosophies, the ways of teaching, the ways of thinking, because they can vary greatly from school to school. And the different paths within architecture. Because look, let's face it, if you look at your path and career as an architect, like what I understood is my idea of an architect, the architect who designs all the time, Ryan, and does the really fun drawings and sketching and presentations, and they're doing charrettes, and every Thursday they get together as a design studio and they're pinning things up on the board and going back and forth like we did in studio. Like those people do exist that do that full time, but they're at the larger firms and they are on the design team. Okay. In a small firm, if you work for a small firm, you might get that opportunity maybe 10% of the time if you've been there for a while to actually get your hands in design. Other than that, you're looking at drawing details. You're looking at fleshing out a design that someone else did. You're looking at, maybe coordinating project management. You're looking at maybe you want to go the owner, kind of the contract administration route where you're on site. Maybe if you're one of the few select souls, you might go into specifications. Yeah. Yeah. To guys like you and I, that sounds like torture, but believe it or not, there are people out there that just eat that stuff up.
I guess the other interesting thing here is, again, I kind of relate from my own personal experience, is we've all got to find our way in the architectural world. It's a big profession.
It's a big pool. It's a big ocean.
There's lots of different directions you can do, and the skills in general that you learn from an architectural degree, they are transferable, and they can be well rewarded in different disciplines and different fields. And I know that there's a kind of a strong, from an academic's point of view, and if I would criticize academia, that are often the retort from academics is, well, we're not creating students for fodder in the profession. We're creating students to be thinkers and to be thinking for themselves, and that's fine.
Fair enough.
That's great. And again, personally, I appreciate that. That's, I had the opportunity to indulge in that, but it's not what I was sold.
Well, and also, are they exclusionary?
No, they're not.
Right. In other words, like, just because we're taught to problem solve, does that mean that we're not taught about the importance of finance and how these two things intermesh and go together?
It shouldn't be.
Like, was it on this episode or the other ones where you talked about developers having very creative solutions?
It was the last one we just did. Yeah.
We just recorded another episode, but yeah, you brought up developers as an example of affiliated profession where they're being very creative, not in the way that architects are creative, but they're being very creative in the way they put together deals, the way they look for financing, the way they piece together different federal incentive programs to be able to provide funding for projects.
I remember having a chat with my dad years ago, and
you and your dad talk.
We talk all this. We talk a lot. Used to.
Oh man, wow.
And he was telling me about creativity doesn't just exist in the arts, and it's a very kind of restricted viewpoint to think that creativity is just in the domain of art and music and in the humanities, and that it can exist outside.
How did that land for you? Like, how did you remember how that conversation came up?
At the time, I was like, whatever.
Like, did he just sit you down over breakfast one and say, Rion, I have something to share with you. This is going to change your world?
I think we were in the car, and I was probably complaining about something not being creative enough. Or,
well, it's interesting.
I can't remember what the context was, but
it's so interesting the way certain memories stick with us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a very specific story, but it really stuck with you.
Yeah.
Like what he imparted to you.
Yeah, because at the time I rejected it.
I thought you might. That's why I thought you were going with that. You're like, nope, Dad,
at the time I rejected it, and I was very resolute with, no, creativity exists in these certain pursuits. And now I look back on this, and like the conversation we were having earlier, I'm like, wow, I was really very close-minded as a young person, that I was so resolute that creativity only exists in this very small domain.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had that. I remember the first time I had that revelation, Rion. It was when I started dabbling in creating websites. So as I started to dabble in creating websites, I was like, wow, this is actually just as fulfilling as architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And the turnaround time is 1 to 2 months as opposed to 1 to 2 years.
Yes.
And I was like, wow.
That's going to suit our personality for sure.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's fascinating. And then I began to, like you said, like your example with developers, I just began to see everywhere how there's creativity in a lot of these other professions. So as we circle back here, Rion, it seems like we're landing on, and the whole reason why I brought up school and my experience at school and how school, the ethos is different and the paths in architecture are different, is because it's really hard to make an informed decision when you go into architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I chose to go to Cornell because it was literally one of the top 10 schools that I saw in this US and News World Report that like ranks schools. And I'm like, well, I've always thought that you always want to go to the best. So I'm going to do the undergraduate program. And at the time, it was the number one ranked 5-year program in the US. I'm like, I set my sights there. If I get accepted, I'm going to go there. That was my criteria for getting into Cornell. But when I went there, I discovered there's an entire ethos with the way that architecture is taught at Cornell University that is very different from the way that it's taught at Auburn or Berkeley or Sci-Arc. There's some similarities, but certainly different than the way it's taught someplace like Cal Poly, which is an excellent program, one of the top programs in the US. But not only do they bring in the artistic side, but they definitely have a more pragmatic approach to it. Very different from the way it would be taught at someplace like Notre Dame that we mentioned earlier. Where it's gonna take a very classical approach. Like we would not learn anything like that at Cornell. As a matter of fact, one of my projects had, I for some reason, I think it was like at sophomore year, I put arches in one of my projects, Ryan.
They're going to beat that one out of you.
Right. I mean, I got literally grilled for 15 minutes. I was so curious why they were focusing on this one aspect of my project.
Well, again, it's really interesting now. I reflect back on the kind of ethos or philosophy of the university that you kind of don't. It kind of blinds you a little bit to the rest of the rest of the world or the rest of the architectural profession. Like at the Bartlett, we were very avant-garde and very modernist, if you like. And now I find these days I have much more interest in classicism and traditional architecture and vernacular forms of architecture and churches and cathedrals and things like that. And that kind of interest was not, you couldn't go into a crit and design something with arches or in a classical tradition. You just would be.
They would just. I mean, that's like going into, if I would have put like a Doric or it wasn't that bad, but I would put like a Doric or Corinthian column on one of my projects, they would have run me out. They probably would have revoked my, my acceptance.
If you were to go back now, this is a difficult question.
It's a fun one. I like thought experiments.
Would you study architecture again?
Ooh. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Well, these are, that's a very good question.
It's a difficult one to answer because I know both of us are very happy with where we are now. And if we hadn't studied architecture, then we wouldn't be where we are now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's that.
You've made me, I'm speechless, Ryan.
Maybe I'll.
Yeah, why don't you, please, you first.
Share some thoughts on it. I think I didn't know anything else at the time. And there was like logical reasons. Oh, you're good at maths and science. And there's the whole prestige of being an architect, the whole marketing brand of architect. That's all very appealing. And it seems to tick a lot of boxes and parents are happy and it appears to be creative and all of that kind of stuff. And, I wasn't aware. I was just ignorant to anything else, basically. Whereas now it's a much more kind of broader, informed perspective that I have. But if I knew what I knew now, then I wouldn't study architecture again. And certainly if I was studying, if I was going to school now in 2025, 2024, I'd go down a different path.
Here's what I would do. Okay, you give me time to think about it.
And I'm not even sure I'd go to university, to be honest. But that's
I appreciate your perspective. So you kind of made a light bulb go off. What I would do is I would get into a top school in an area that's affluent. Like maybe try to get into an Ivy League school. But I'd want to go to a school that was close by where I wanted to settle down. So it might be in California somewhere. And I would focus on not so much what I was learning, but I would focus on making connections with the right people.
That's interesting, yeah.
That's what I would do. I would focus on making connections with the right people and impressing the right people. In other words, getting good grades so that like the right professors would take notice of me or whatever, but really cultivating relationships, which is one thing I did not do at Cornell. I thought it was all about the education. I haven't kept in touch with any of my professors. I didn't get to know any of them beyond being my professor, which is a total shame. I didn't become very close to any of my classmates or colleagues in architecture at Cornell, which is fine because I didn't really end up in the industry. And one thing I didn't know, Ryan, about what's so important about college, where you go, is that a lot of the architects who go to Cornell stay out in the East. And so it's very advantageous because you're going to get job offers from people. Oh yeah, I know Enoch, he was in my class. Yeah, so there's a lot of that happening where they're like,
Right.
jumping from job to job and firm to firm because of the network that was created on the East Coast. So out here, when I moved to California, I mean, there's very few architects that went to Cornell Architecture School of Art and Planning out here in California. So good question. Looking back, I think that for me, it's not so important what I study. I might have actually gone into a different field of study that I really loved architecture. That's the thing. Architecture I felt was very broad. There was a dose of history in there.
It's very
There was a dose
nurturing.
of science.
It's a very rich subject.
It's very rich, and it's very much about the arts, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and there's lots of different ways that you can pursue your own interest within it. Certainly a kind of, intellectual university, if you like.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Well,
I think it's interesting as well what you say about building the network. And that's something I'd certainly give advice to my younger self, is the skill sets that I thought were frivolous, like socializing and making relationships, that I kind of had a guilt about, probably because of the way I was using that skill. But it never...
How are you using that skill, Ryan?
Just to muck around and...
Drug, sex, and rock and roll in that order?
Hedonistic. having fun with other people lifestyle.
Yeah.
But actually, I nobody ever, and it wasn't until I was working with a business consultant, we actually kind of sat down and just had a look at what are your natural skills? What are you good at? As opposed to like your academic skills. Well, I'm good at art. I'm good at science. Well, really, are you? You're just getting, you're getting decent grades, and they're all kind of arbitrary and at a certain level. But does that really express what you're great at? And so these kind of other skills, certainly communication, talking, presenting, that's a rich skill set to explore and to kind of start investigating that at an earlier age would have been interesting.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But
and actually
regrets.
Something else. Can I change my answer, Ryan?
Yeah, there isn't. This is the thing. My answer will change to this.
Okay, thank goodness.
As well.
I'm not going to hold me to it.
There isn't a definitive on this.
I would avoid school altogether, and I would buy as much Bitcoin as I could possibly buy. Can you imagine I went to school in 1996? I don't even know if Bitcoin was around back then. When was Bitcoin invented?
2001, 2002, 1994.
Okay, so 2008. Wow.
How was it?
Yeah, 2008. I find it so interesting that Bitcoin this is so crazy. Like when you think about it, Bitcoin, they do not know we don't really know who invented Bitcoin. Isn't that crazy? It was Satoshi Nakamoto, who's an anonymous, it's a pseudonym. We don't even know who. Well, Ryan, we've discussed a lot today. We started out why are architects so, with this cool thread we found on Reddit, why are architects so cynical about the profession? We've talked about academia. We've talked about cryptocurrency, universities, marketing, sales,
I guess
misplaced expectations.
One message, I suppose, a positive message that we should end on is that,
let's end on a positive note.
Is that there is so much possibility for people who have studied architecture. There are so many transferable skills. There's so many different ways, certainly when you infuse architecture with other skills like business, of course, which we're advocates for, that the potential for what we can do with architectural education is enormous.
And a quick nod to you bring up some of our friends over at Out of Architecture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You could check them out because they specifically focus on talking about producing a lot of content about, how maybe if you're not really happy in architecture, how you might be able to transfer those skill sets over into other affiliated fields.
If they'd been around in 2008, I would have hooked them up and been all over that.
Yeah, followed them. Aaron and Jake over there at Out of Architecture. Yeah. All right, Ryan, that is a positive note. I think that's a great place to end on the idea that, when I look back at my architectural career, the instruction was rigorous. And as much as we talk about how it may not have directly helped me with some of the technical aspects of architecture, it certainly helped develop my problem solving, not only ability, but also confidence in myself that, these challenges are here to be solved. So in that case,
that's the other thing not to dismiss is that architecture schools are robust, competitive environments. And I'm very grateful for that, actually. I'm very grateful for the competitive nature that was at the Bartlett. And I was around people who were brilliant, like really, insanely talented kids. And you'd walk in and you were just like, oh my God, how the hell have they done that? And it brought about a very, a kind of a certain ambition as well. And it also, you had to, at some point, kind of not take yourself so seriously with your work. And there were some kind of epic fails and emotions and, conversations that could land in a very harsh way if you weren't responsible for how you were interpreting it. And I'm very grateful for that environment, because I remember in my degree feeling very down about what I was doing and my work and all this kind of stuff. And it was one of the things that got me interested in, reading about Buddhism and picking up a Tony Robbins book. And, I wanted to learn how do I deal with the mental side of this? And the tough environment, it's great for that. I know it can take its casualties, but
here's an interesting call out. Maybe for those of you involved in academia who listen to this podcast, which are probably a very small minority. Perhaps three of you, three people out there who are involved in academia and actually listen to this podcast. Or if you have any influence in academia, I would be curious to know if any universities have thought about having another course of study within their architecture program that is more focused on design thinking, sort of agnostic design thinking as opposed to strictly architecture. Because when I look at my education at Cornell was, I would say it was 85% design thinking, maybe 15% architecture, meaning a lot of the things that we were studying, even though they were in the context of architecture, they were really based around design thinking. And so really it was a design thinking degree in architecture is what I feel like I received over there.
I'd echo that. And I know that the Bartlett, for example, I remember Peter Cook, who was the dean at the school for many years, him saying at one point they were considering divorcing themselves from the RABA pathway to becoming an architect, because every year the RABA would kind of, you've got to have this box and this box and this box ticked. And they had considered just making an architectural thinking course or some kind of architectural design thinking. So it kind of broke away. So I'm sure there are lots of academics who are kind of, and there's a lot
because the rigor of an architectural program would be invaluable for an innovative startup company.
Absolutely.
Any company in any other area of field. I just did a quick search online. It looks like Duke University. Go ahead.
Just the rigor of learning to iterate on an idea. Having to go through something again and again and again until you get something emergent that comes out. That's such a good sort of discipline to learn. And again, as well, the kind of robustness of the architectural environment is, it's not like what real life is like, particularly in business.
Yeah, so it would be an interesting solution to give students in architecture the opportunity to maybe stay in the program, but actually focus their career goals and kind of open them up to the possibility of using their design skills in non-architecture related ways. That would be interesting. I wonder if there's any schools doing that right now, any architecture schools. So if you know of anything like that, we'd be interested to hear about it. It looks like Stanford has a creativity and design thinking program an online program.
I know the Bartlett does. The Bartlett has all sorts of
Do they?
interesting degrees now that are kind of aside to the architectural path in different disciplines.
Interesting. As always, if you have any feedback about this or any other episodes, please drop that over to us via email, support@businessofarchitecture.com, or just visit our website and you can click on contact us, and there's a handy dandy contact form that goes directly to the team here at Business of Architecture. And as always, if you're a firm owner or you have entrepreneurial drive inside of you and you don't want to play the hands that you were dealt, in other words, you're not willing to accept the status quo of the way that so many times in architecture we think that this is just the hand that we're dealt and we got to deal with it, then we invite you to head on over to smartpracticemethod.com, where you will get free access to a 60-minute masterclass where I've distilled as much information as I can about the past 10 to 15 years on the path that both Rion and I have been on as we've been out there in the world, going where most architects never go, and bringing this information back and synthesizing it for you to help understand how to apply the latest design thinking to your practice. So that's smartpractice.method.com. Smartpracticemethod.com, as I mentioned. When you go over there, you'll be able to give us your email address and get instant access to that information.
And that's a wrap. Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Rion and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together, so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, we'll give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago. And now a word from today's sponsor. A while ago, I began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. I was intrigued by another business that addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor costs. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration. And World Teams helps you reduce your operating costs without compromising the quality that is so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. That's one word, businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationship. Go to businessofarchitecture.com/world teams.
The views expressed on the show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment, except to help you conquer the world. Carpe diem.